One Piece has gone on long enough for all of us to have seen at least a few 10 out of 10 backstories from this series. Nami's backstory, exquisite writing. Chopper's backstory, straight tears. Oden's backstory, holy world building. Great Terminal with Luffy, Ace, and Sabo, 11 out of 10, etc, etc. This series does a phenomenal job at sucking you into a whole new world with every backstory. Dandadan also does a really good job with backstories, but in such a different way though. Both of these series have had some of the greatest flashbacks I've ever bore witness to, while being damn near polar opposites of each other in terms of structure. One Piece and Dandadan are truly the king of backstories. One Piece will give us like 10 plus chapters of a character's backstory and introduce us to a myriad of new characters and islands to flesh out who this person is and the environment they grew up in. Every flashback in One Piece will ultimately end up serving the larger world that's been built over the course of this series through the vessel of a specific character. Dandadan has done this before too, but they primarily focus on character in terms of the individual instead of using them as a vessel for world building. Both of these series do flashbacks so excellently, but the execution is so very different between the two. A One Piece flashback could be as long as certain series in their entirety, but a Dandadan flashback will usually be much shorter and use subtext to drive the story. Many Dandadan flashbacks have little to no dialogue for real, and we the audience have to fill in a lot of blanks, and I think that format of flashback works so well for Dandadan specifically because this entire series is built on freedom, in the sense of like, Yukinobu Tatsu is just drawing stuff. He's just doing stuff for a lot of this series. Not really what's happening now in the manga, but like for the majority of this series, it's really just, hey, let's throw some weird aliens and weird ghosts around and use love as the through line, and let's just see what happens. So these flashbacks being very subtext heavy, being very you have to put the pieces together, I think works so well. We get such a snapshot of these different yokai and aliens' lives in such a short piece of, I personally think it's beautiful. It's like the through line of a Dandadan backstory lies in emotion rather than crazy setup or explanations for future events. A flashback in Dandadan shows us how a yokai became the way they are, or how any of the characters ended up being in the situations they're in now. I think the first two flashbacks in this series are a great example of the formatting of backstories here. Akro Silky's story took us through the gut-wrenching life of a mother struggling to give her little daughter the best life she could, just for it to all be taken away from her in an instant, leaving her with no other reason to keep going. To this day, Akro Silky's backstory is top 3 in Dandadan, especially because of how it relates to Ida, but more on that later. Evil Eye's backstory was really about a lonely child who just wanted to play with other kids. Whole time, this little was getting prepped to be a human sacrifice. His spirit ended up being trapped inside the same house he got sacrificed in, and he was forced to basically watch generations of parents log off as a result of his curse. The yokai backstories in this series are especially sad because these tend to be very vengeful and angry spirits who got done all kinds of dirty when they were alive. Of course, a struggling mother who lost everything and a lonely boy who wasn't allowed any sort of human connection would end up becoming very vengeful spirits. The way these backstories are told is just so fire to me because we don't necessarily need an explanation for every little detail here. We understand the situation these characters are in through their emotions and how they respond to what's happening to them. Like for example, if Akro Silky's backstory took place in One Piece, we would have gotten an in-depth detailed viewing of why she owed the mafia money, why she was like down bad financially, how her daughter was born. Like we would have gotten a lot more details about her personal life leading up to what we've seen in the Dandadan version of the backstory. And for One Piece and the story that One Piece is telling, that would have worked because we would have gotten more world building as to who these mobsters are, why she owes them money. If it was One Piece, we would have seen how everybody's connected through this vast large world. That's what One Piece is all about. Everybody in One Piece is connected somehow through this crazy world, but in Dandadan, it's just the individual and emotion. It's just straight individuals going through some shit. You feel me? I think another huge part of these two yokai's stories are the characters that end up sympathizing with them in the present day. Ida had lost her mother at a very young age, so being exposed to Akro Silky's origin definitely connected with her in a super emotional way. Not to mention, she also straight up had an interaction with her spirit as a child, but that only led to Akro Silky's obsession with Ida, and not vice versa. I still do think Ida herself would have resonated with Akro Silky's life, regardless of whether they met or not, because she knows what it's like to lose somebody like a mother, where Akro Silky lost her daughter. These two have like a weird relationship of like, we both lost what the other means to the other. In the case of Evil Eye and Gigi, it's not like Gigi was a particularly lonely kid at all, but he did feel extremely guilty for contributing to Momo's childhood bullying. So a part of me kind of thinks that Gigi wanting to play with this lonely child might have something to do with that guilt. But also, Gigi's just generally a good guy, so maybe not. The human backstories in this series generally follow this same formula of short and sweet, plus subtext intensive too. But there's one flashback in Dandadan that has some of that One Piece DNA in it. There's no manga spoilers here, but Vamola's flashback in the Space Globalist arc genuinely feels like a fusion of both of these series' flashback formulas. The flashback itself is longer than usual and there's more dialogue, but that emotional through line still hits crazy, and there are still a few holes that we gotta fill in for ourselves. Vamola's flashback in this arc just relies way less on subtext than usual for this series. Like, obviously there is still that little subtext element there, but a lot of this flashback is like, we're in the heart of it and we're seeing it, and we are getting a major understanding of what this means for the larger world of Dandadan potentially, and like future events. I ain't gonna lie, I'm not here to spoil no manga stuff, but like, I have a feeling this flashback is going to be relevant at some point down the line in this series. That's just my sneaking suspicion. Who knows though? Truly, who knows? Butatsu is even more unpredictable than Oda because One Piece is going to a location. One Piece is going somewhere. We got all these different players in One Piece that are moving towards the same goal of the One Piece. Dandadan's backstories work because of how much we don't see, but One Piece's backstories work for the exact opposite reason, which is kind of beautiful. Take for example my GOAT Trafalgar Law. We get a very in-depth view into his childhood, from being with his family, watching his whole family get Swiss cheese, getting groomed to be the ultimate tool for Doflamingo, and watching the only person who cared for him at that point get boomed too. Like, it's very much still a flashback focused on Law, but we get so much world building too through the other characters that appear, and through little things like Amber Lead disease coming back into relevancy during Kuma's backstory with Bonnie. This backstory not only serves Law, but it also shows a lot about Dofi's past, Corazon, some of Dofi's crew. Even Diaz Drake got something with his dad being in there too. Law's flashback is so funny to me because the fact that Drake's dad was in there made so many people think that Law was gonna be like an undercover member of SWORD, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm so glad Law was not no undercover member of SWORD. Respectfully, Law being a Marine would have made me look at that a little different. I'm not gonna lie, I would have looked at that a little different. The post-war flashback with Sabo, Ace, and Luffy was also some of the best storytelling we've seen out of this series. Watching three kids from such different backgrounds become brothers is genuinely so phenomenal, so sensational. This flashback especially came at the perfect time because it was right after Marineford and the tragic end of one of the sauciest characters in the whole series. RIP a young GOAT. Ace is honestly a masterclass in how to make a character even cooler after they're dead. Most of Ace's sauce we don't get until after the dies. Ace is banging out with I don't know, a lot of strong because I'm trying to remember who specifically Ace was banging out with. But like, Ace is Luffy with daddy issues and no plot armor. Dead ass. This Ace, well, hold on. Ace is Luffy with daddy issues, no plot armor, and also some more manners and shit. As an audience, we weren't really super familiar with Ace prior to that arc outside of Alabasta. And a little Thriller Bark, right? Side note, Ace's time with the Straw Hats being filler just does not sit right with me. That just do not sit right with me. I don't care, it wasn't in the manga. That's canon. But we didn't get a lot of time with Ace while he was alive, so his end hit so hard, mostly because of Luffy's reaction to it. That is until we get this flashback right after. Seeing how Luffy, Ace, and Sabo were as kids really recontextualizes a lot of Ace's moments on Marineford. And that "thank you for loving me" line hurts so much more. Oh my goodness. You can't see it from this backdrop, but literally right off frame, I have that manga panel framed on my wall of Ace crying saying "thank you for loving me, bro." Oh my god! This also means Luffy has now lost both of his brothers at this point too, so it's like, damn, this is going through it. It makes us understand more why Ace fell for Akainu's rage bait too. Ace never really had a father in his life and resented the f out of Roger for not only not being there, but also for leaving him with nothing but a huge shadow to be stuck in. So of course he's gonna be upset when somebody start talking heavy about his real dad, Whitebeard, who was actually there for him. One Piece's backstories have been 10 out of 10 S tier, votes. But I think the newer backstories have done a phenomenal job at recontextualizing previous parts of this story and the world that's been built up. Kuma's flashback is the best example of this. This backstory literally has everything. World building, it's all mighty character driven, and it makes us look back at the entirety of the first half of this series differently. I'm not gonna lie, Kuma's backstory may genuinely be
top 3 in this whole series.
Which is crazy to say because the flashback we're getting right now on, you know what I'm saying, in the manga is crazy. Oden's backstory I thought was like, wow, this world has been recontextualized, this is crazy. But then Kuma's backstory did it again and made it relevant to the shit that we literally watched with our own eyes earlier in the series. That's crazy. But at the core of everything, this backstory is about the purest soul in this entire series, just trying to help people, especially his daughter. Oda, being a girl dad, definitely influenced so much of this backstory. I'm already knowing. This backstory literally gives us everything. We get glimpses of legendary events like God Valley, but because it's through the lens of one Kuma, we can't see everything. We're focused on getting these slaves out of here because that's what Kuma's focused on. Lots of different fan favorite characters show up all throughout the flashback too, but at the end of the day, it's still about this Jolly Brown Giant. Side note of Doom, it was genuinely crazy seeing Roger at God Valley with his straw hat on his back because it's like, yo, I think Luffy should never learn that his straw hat used to belong to Gold Roger. I think it's better for the story if Luffy never finds out that Roger is the originator of this straw hat. Genuinely. Luffy just being the way he is enough. We don't need this whole chosen one type beat. Luffy don't give a f about no prophecy. Luffy is going to do what the f Luffy want to do every time. Even the current flashback happening right now on Elbaf has been phenomenal for recontextualizing certain parts of the story and just building so much on characters who don't even seem involved with the shit directly. It's just crazy to me that both One Piece and Dandadan do backstories so perfectly, but in such vastly different ways. It's genuinely so fire to me. Their separate ways of telling these stories fits in line with how these series flow in general too. Most of Dandadan is very much wacky things happening out of nowhere, right? The power system isn't a surgically defined thing. The villains just kind of show up for the most part, etc, etc. Like now we're getting into some overarching threats in the story with the manga, but most of this series wasn't that. And so having smaller, less context heavy backstories makes sense. Whereas One Piece always feels like it's building to something, where everything is always connected to something else we've seen previously. Even when Oda wasn't initially planning on connecting two things together, he will do an excellent job of making it seem like that was always the plan. I.e. Bonnie and Kuma. Look. I just so heavily doubt that Bonnie and Kuma's relationship was always in his head as father and daughter. If we seen Kuma all the way back when One Piece had its OG art style and Bonnie's a part of the supernova and the supernova were conceived literally right when Sabaody was being created, that means there's no way Oda was going to have these two be father and daughter. There's no way, but he weaved it together so beautifully, it just works. But yeah, I've seen some beautiful backstories throughout all of fiction, some excellently written backstories, but it's just none of them hit the way One Piece and Dandadan's backstories hit. One Piece and Dandadan are both the best at doing what they do best. Dreams versus love. But yeah, shout out Dandadan, shout out One Piece, and shout out you.
I can't feel my face right now, I'm burning up. I got this feeling that I won't come down like, got this feeling that I won't come down like, got this feeling that I won't come down.